My brother got a Rolex at his graduation dinner. When it was my turn, Dad ordered dessert and changed the subject. I sat there for another hour. Then I quietly excused myself. I haven't been back since. Last month, he finally asked why. My name's Anthony. I'm 29 years old. And I want to tell you about the night I finally understood something I'd been pretending not to know for most of my life. I wasn't less loved. That word, love, isn't really what we're talking about. I was less considered, less visible, less worth pausing for. And I figured that out watching my brother unwrap a Rolex at a graduation dinner while my dad reached for the dessert menu and casually changed the subject when it was my turn to be celebrated. I know that sounds like a small thing when I lay it out that way. A watch, a dinner, a distracted father. But I think you already know it wasn't small. If it were small, I wouldn't be here, and I'd have gone back home for Christmas. Let me back up, because this story doesn't make sense without the context, and the context is basically my entire childhood. I grew up in a mid-sized city in Ohio, the second of two sons. My older brother's name is Garrett. Garrett is 3 years older than me, which means he was always first. First to drive, first to date, first to graduate, first to do everything that mattered in our house. In a different family, birth order is just a fact. In our family, it was treated like a permanent ranking system. Garrett came first. Garrett stayed first. And somewhere along the way, my dad decided that was just how things were going to be, and he never really revisited that decision. My dad's name is Russell. Russ, to his friends. Dad, to me, though I've been reconsidering that title for about a year now. He's 61, retired early from a manufacturing management job, golfs 3 times a week, and has one of those personalities where he genuinely believes he's being fair and reasonable at all times. That's the part that makes it complicated. He's not mean. He's not cruel. He never screamed at me or called me names or did anything that would have been easy to point at and say, there. That's the thing. He just kept choosing Garrett. Quietly, consistently, over and over, in ways that were easy to explain away individually but impossible to ignore collectively. My mom, Diane, is the kind of woman who smooths things over. She's warm and she loves her kids. I genuinely believe that. But she has this habit of deciding that peace is more important than honesty. When I bring something up as a kid, why did Garrett get the bigger room? Why did he get to go to basketball camp and I got signed up for the community rec league? Why was his report card on the fridge and mine just handed back to me? She'd say something like, Anthony, you know we love you both the same, and then redirect to what was for dinner. She wasn't lying exactly. She just wasn't answering. Garrett and I aren't enemies. That's the other complicated part. He's not some mustache-twirling villain who gloated about his preferred status. He's just a guy who grew up getting things and assumed he deserved them, which is a completely predictable outcome when you're the golden child in a household that never examines itself. We're not close, but we're civil. We can be in the same room. We can make it through a holiday dinner. For a long time, I convinced myself that was enough. The Rolex thing happened 18 months ago. Garrett graduated with his MBA from a pretty well-regarded program. I'll give him that. He worked for it. My family threw him a graduation dinner at a nice steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with leather menus and servers who introduce themselves and refill your water glass before it's half empty. There were 12 of us at a long table. My parents, Garrett, his girlfriend Petra, my aunt and uncle, a couple of Garrett's friends, and me and my girlfriend at the time, Simone. The dinner was nice. I was happy for Garrett, genuinely. Getting an MBA is a real accomplishment, and I wasn't sitting there stewing. I was having a good time, drinking decent wine, eating a steak that cost $42 and was worth every cent. And then my dad stood up, tapped his glass, and gave a toast. A real toast. 5 minutes, emotional, talking about how proud he was, how hard Garrett had worked, how he'd always known Garrett was destined for great things. He got a little misty at the end. My aunt had her hand over her heart. Then my dad reached under the table and produced a small navy blue box. Inside was a Rolex. Stainless steel, classic style, the kind of watch that announces that someone really thought about you. Garrett looked genuinely surprised. There was applause. Petra took a photo. It was a real moment. 3 months earlier, I had graduated with my bachelor's degree in accounting. 4 years of night school while working full-time because I hadn't gone straight to college after high school. I'd spent 2 years working to save money, then enrolled, then had to take a leave of absence for a semester when I had a health scare that burned through my savings. So 4 years turned into 5.5, but I got there. I walked across that stage at 31 credits in my final semester, and I was proud of myself in a way that was private and real. My family came to the ceremony. We went to lunch afterward at a casual Italian place. Not a steakhouse, but fine, I didn't need a steakhouse. My dad paid for the meal, gave me a card with $200 in it, told me congratulations, and talked about the drive home for about 10 minutes because there'd been construction on the highway. That was it. No toast. No box. No misty eyes. I told myself it wasn't a competition. I told myself an MBA from a name-brand program is different than a bachelor's from a state school. I told myself a lot of things, the way you do when you've had a lifetime of practice at explaining away a feeling you don't want to have. But then I was sitting at that steakhouse watching my father hand my brother a Rolex, and something in me got very quiet and very clear. About halfway through dessert, my aunt, my dad's sister, a woman named Lorraine who has never once sugar-coated a single thing in her life, looked down the table at my dad and said, "Russ, didn't Anthony just graduate too?" A few months ago, she wasn't trying to start anything. She was just being Lorraine. The table went a little still. I looked at my dad. He looked up from his creme brulee, smiled at me, and said, "Anthony, yeah, we're proud of him too." And then he asked the server if there was a coffee refill available. That was it. That was the whole thing. I sat at that table for another hour. I smiled when I was supposed to smile. I laughed at a joke Garrett's friend made about the bar exam. Simone squeezed my hand under the table because Simone always knew. And when the check came and people started gathering their jackets, I stood up, hugged my mom, told Garrett congratulations one more time, and said I was tired and had an early morning. I drove home very calmly. I didn't cry. I didn't vent to Simone. I just felt something close into place, like a door I'd been leaving ajar for my entire adult life had finally swung shut on its own. I haven't been back since. Not for Thanksgiving, not for Christmas, not for my dad's birthday in March. I've texted my mom. I've kept things pleasant and surface level, and I haven't explained a thing. Last month, my dad called me and asked why. I want to tell you what I said, but first I need to tell you everything that happened in between, because the conversation I had with my father last month was only possible because of the 18 months that came before it. And those 18 months were, I don't know, the most important of my life. Maybe. That's probably true. Stick with me here. This gets better. A lot better. Here's something I want to be honest about before I keep going. The Rolex dinner wasn't the first time. It was just the last time. And there's an important difference between those two things that I spent most of my 20s not understanding. The first time I really felt it in a way that landed in my chest and stayed there. I was 16. Garrett was 19 and had just gotten his driver's license, which he'd gotten late because he'd failed the test twice. When he finally passed, my dad took him to a car dealership and co-signed on a used Civic. Nothing fancy, but it was a car, and more importantly, it was a symbol. It was my dad saying, "You're ready. I trust you." Here's a key. When I turned 17 and passed my test on the first try, I mentioned to my dad that it might be useful to have access to a car. He said, "There's always the bus." I don't think he even noticed the difference. That's almost the harder part to accept. I could keep going. The college fund that was mostly spent on Garrett's first 3 years before they told me it was depleted when my turn came. The summer internship my dad called in a favor to get Garrett and never offered to do the same for me. The way every holiday conversation centered on Garrett's job, Garrett's apartment, Garrett's girlfriend, Garrett's future, but I don't want this to turn into a grievance list. The point isn't the inventory. The point is that I had been quietly absorbing the message for 29 years, and the night of the Rolex dinner was the night I finally stopped arguing with what I'd been hearing all along. About 3 weeks after that dinner, I did something I'd been putting off for almost a year. I called a therapist. Her name was Dr. Ren Castillo, and she had an office above a coffee shop, and she was exactly as no-nonsense as I needed her to be. I didn't go in there looking for someone to validate my grievances. I went in because I'd started to notice that the coping skills I'd developed for managing my family had started bleeding into the rest of my life. At work, with Simone, with friends. I was hyper-vigilant about taking up too much space. I apologized constantly. I undersold myself in every professional situation because somewhere in the back of my head was this voice that had decided I was the one who didn't warrant a speech or a watch. Dr. Castillo didn't diagnose my dad or label my childhood or hand me a permission slip to cut off my family. She just helped me see the pattern clearly, without the fog of hoping it would turn out to mean something different. Meanwhile, things with Simone were fraying. This part is painful to write, and I want to be fair to her, so I'll say it plainly. Simone was a good person who wanted a partner who was fully present, and I wasn't. Not because I didn't care about her. I did, but because I had never learned how to ask for what I needed, and that made me a frustrating person to love. We ended things in November, about 2 months after the Rolex dinner, and it was mutual enough that neither of us had to be the villain, but painful enough that I didn't sleep well for weeks. So by December I was single, newly in therapy, and not going home for the holidays for the first time in my life. I told my mom I was spending Christmas with a friend, which was technically true. I spent it with my friend Ozzy, who is one of the funnier and more genuinely decent human beings I have ever met, and who asked me absolutely nothing about my family, and instead made a turkey that was somehow both overcooked and underprepared at the same time. It was the best Christmas I'd had in years. But here's where the story takes a turn I didn't see coming. In January, my dad called. Not a text, an actual phone call, which for my dad usually means something logistical. He wanted to know if I was coming to my parents' anniversary dinner at the end of the month. 35 years. My mom had planned a small gathering at the house. I said I didn't think I'd make it. He didn't push. He said, "Okay," the way someone says okay when they expect you to walk it back, and when I didn't, the call ended in about 90 seconds. 3 days later, my mom called. Her approach was warmer, more careful. She said she'd noticed I hadn't been around, that she missed me, that she hoped everything was all right. I told her everything was fine. She said, "Your father would really like you there." Not, "I would really like you there. Your father would." Even my mom's emotional appeal was filtered through the hierarchy, and I don't think she even heard herself do it. I didn't go to the anniversary dinner. My brother called me the following week. This I did not expect. Garrett and I just don't call each other. We exist in the same family. We're polite at gatherings, but we don't have a relationship outside of those gatherings. So when his name came up on my phone at 8:30 on a Tuesday night, I stared at it for a moment before I answered. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. Silence for a moment. "Mom's upset," he said. "I know," I said. "She thinks you're going through something." "I'm fine." Another pause. Then, "Did something happen at my graduation dinner?" Someone said something weird might have happened. I want to describe to you exactly what I felt in that moment, because it was specific and it was strange. It wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was something closer to exhaustion. The exhaustion of realizing that even now, no one was quite asking the right question. Someone said something weird might have happened, as if the problem were an incident, as if there'd been a spilled drink or an awkward toast, and if someone could just identify the spill and clean it up, everything would be fine. "Nothing happened," I said. "I'm just taking some time." "From the family?" "Yeah." He didn't know what to do with that. Garrett processes the world in a pretty linear way. There's a problem, you fix the problem, you move on. He doesn't have a file for this kind of thing. There was a pause that lasted long enough to be uncomfortable, and then he said, "Well, let me know if you need anything." And I said I would, and that was the end of it. But that call cracked something open, because it was the first time anyone had called me directly instead of through my mom. The first time anyone had acknowledged, even circuitously, that maybe I had a reason to be gone rather than just an obstacle to manage. It didn't fix anything, but it lodged itself in the back of my mind, and it would come back to matter later. What none of them knew, what I hadn't told any of them, was that something was happening in my professional life that was about to change the whole landscape. I'd been working at a mid-sized accounting firm for 4 years, doing solid but unremarkable work, telling myself I was paying my dues. 3 weeks before the anniversary dinner I'd skipped, my supervisor called me into her office. Her name was Claudette, and she was one of those managers who made you feel like she'd had you figured out before you'd figured out yourself. She slid a folder across her desk and said, "I want to move you into the advisory track. I've been watching your work, and I think you're leaving a lot on the table in your current role. This would mean a title change, a pay increase, and a very different set of responsibilities." I sat there for a second. Then I said, "Can I ask why now?" She looked at me steadily and said, "Because I've been trying to figure out why you keep sitting in the back row when you're clearly one of the best people in the room. I'd like to see what you do with a bigger seat." I drove home that night and sat in my car for a while before I went inside. Not because I was sad. For once, it wasn't that. I just needed a minute to let something in that I'd been holding at arm's length for a long time. Someone saw me. Someone looked directly at me and said, You are worth more than you've been given. I thought about the steakhouse. I thought about the dessert menu. Then I went inside and accepted the job in the morning. The next 12 months were the strangest of my life, and I mean that as a compliment to the 12 months. I want to tell you about them in order because they built on each other in ways that felt random while they were happening and obvious in retrospect. Isn't that always how it goes? You're living through what feels like a scattered mess of events, and you can't see the shape of it until you're standing on the other side looking back. I stepped into the advisory role in February. The first month was genuinely humbling. The kind of humbling where you realize how many things you'd been doing competently when you could have been doing them excellently. And the gap between those two things is mostly just confidence. Claudette gave me a client list and said, "Go build relationships. The technical work is the easy part." She was right. The technical work was the easy part. The relationship part was where I had to actually confront the thing I'd been working on with Dr. Castillo, the tendency to minimize, to defer, to apologize for the space I took up before I'd even taken it. I had a client early on, a business owner named Harlan who ran 3 auto repair shops and had the energy of a man who'd been incorrectly told he was dying at age 40 and had subsequently decided to live every day as if it were his last loud one. He was 58, laughed at everything including things that weren't funny, and within our second meeting, he looked at me over a spreadsheet and said, "You're being too careful. I can tell you see the problem. Just say the thing." I said the thing. The thing was that his second location was bleeding money in ways that weren't obvious from the surface numbers, and fixing it would require a harder conversation with the manager there than Harlan had been willing to have. He blinked at me. Then he laughed, which I learned was his response to most input regardless of type. "How long have you known that?" he said. "About 20 minutes into our first meeting," I said. He slapped the table. "Then what were you waiting for?" "Honestly, Harlan, my whole life, sort of. But I kept that one to myself." The month after my conversation with Claudette, I started looking at apartments. I'd been renting a perfectly adequate one-bedroom that I'd moved into with Simone and then kept after the breakup. But it was full of the particular ghost energy of a relationship that hadn't quite worked, and I'd been meaning to move for months. I found a place in a neighborhood I liked, 2 bedrooms because I wanted a real home office, and the rent was higher than I was used to, but the salary bump made it possible. I signed the lease in March and moved in on a Saturday with Ozzy's help and 3 medium pizzas. Ozzy, for the record, brought a housewarming gift that was a framed cross-stitch that read, "You live here now," in block letters, which was both deeply unhelpful as decor and one of the more touching things anyone has ever given me. I put it on the wall anyway. The apartment changed something in me in a way I hadn't anticipated. I know that sounds like an ad for a real estate company. I'm not saying a physical space fixed my psychology, but there's something about building an environment that's entirely your own choosing. Furniture you picked, a kitchen stocked with things you actually eat, walls that don't hold any memories except the ones you make in them. That reinforces the idea that your preferences matter, that what you like is worth having. I'd never quite let myself believe that. By May, 3 months into the new role, Claudette told me I was ahead of pace. She said this so matter-of-factly that I almost didn't register it. I asked what that meant in practical terms, and she said, "It means keep doing what you're doing, and we'll have a different conversation at your review." The different conversation turned out to be about accelerating my path to senior advisor, a title that came with its own office and a compensation package that made me sit very still for a moment when she put the number in front of me. I said yes so fast it was almost embarrassing. Claudette smiled and said, "There he is." Through all of this, my family contact stayed minimal. Texts with my mom, maybe once a week, nothing substantive. My dad texted me twice in the entire spring. Once to tell me the Cleveland Browns had managed to do something disappointing, which is so reliably Cleveland it barely counts as information, and once to say my mom was making my favorite meal if I wanted to come over. I responded to both with something short and friendly and didn't go over. I wasn't being dramatic about the distance. I wasn't punishing anyone or nursing a plan. I was just not ready. I hadn't figured out what I wanted to say or whether saying it would matter or what a relationship with my family even looked like if it didn't look like the one we'd always had. Dr. Castillo kept asking me what outcome I was hoping for, and for months I didn't have an answer. Sometime around June, I started seeing someone. Her name is Tully. She's 32, she's a civil engineer, and she has the particular confidence of a person who has never once apologized for being good at things. We met at a birthday party for Ozzy's girlfriend and spent approximately 4 hours in a corner talking about things I don't usually talk about on a first meeting. Family, work, what we were proud of, what we wished we'd done sooner. She didn't perform at me. She just talked. It was the most relaxing 4 hours I'd spent with a new person since I could remember. On our third date, she said, "You do this thing where you're about to say something, and then you change it to something smaller. I've noticed it twice now." I said, "I'm working on it." She said, "Good," and that was it. No elaboration, no fixing, just acknowledgement, and then she moved on. She is not Simone, and I am not who I was when I was with Simone, and I think those two facts are equally important. By late summer, I had the job, the apartment, the relationship, the therapy, which sounds like a listicle for how to fix your life, and I don't want to make it sound frictionless, because it wasn't. There were weeks where the distance from my family felt right and weeks where it made me sad in a way that was hard to articulate. Not longing, exactly, but a kind of grief for the family I wished I'd had rather than the one I actually had. Dr. Castillo told me those feelings could coexist, which was annoying to hear and accurate. What was building, quietly, was something I hadn't fully named yet. A sense of my own weight, of being a person who takes up a proportionate amount of space and has the standing to say what he actually thinks, of not needing to shrink the thing I'd accomplished into something more acceptable before presenting it to my family. And then, in September, Garrett called me again. This time his tone was different, less transactional. He said he'd been thinking about our last conversation, the one in January where I'd said I was taking some time. He said, "I didn't really know what to say then. I'm not sure I know what to say now either, but I wanted to call." I let the silence sit for a moment. He said, "Is it about the dinner? The graduation thing?" And this time I said, "Yeah, Garrett, it's about the dinner." He was quiet for a while, long enough that I thought maybe the call had dropped. Then he said, "The watch thing?" "Not just the watch," I said. "But yeah, that was the night I stopped pretending the watch thing was fine." He didn't argue. He didn't defend our dad. He just said, "I hear you." And I think he meant it because he knows. He has to know, on some level. The way people who grow up in a house always know the unspoken architecture of it, even if they never say it out loud. "I'm not gone forever," I told him. "I'm just figuring some stuff out." We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important. His work, my work, a terrible movie we'd both watched. And it was the most honest conversation I'd had with my brother in my entire adult life. My dad still hadn't called. My dad was still waiting for this to resolve itself on its own, which had been his approach to most things involving me for 29 years. That was about to change. October arrived, and I did something I hadn't done in a year. I thought seriously about what I wanted the conversation with my dad to look like. I want to be clear about what I was not doing. I was not plotting revenge. I was not building a case to humiliate him. I'm an accountant, not a trial lawyer, and even if I had the instincts for that kind of theater, it wouldn't have been what I was after. What I wanted was simpler and harder than revenge. I wanted to be seen. I wanted the actual conversation, the one where I said out loud what had been true for decades, and he had to sit in the same room with it rather than reaching for a dessert menu. But I'd learned enough from Dr. Castillo to know that wanting something doesn't mean you're ready for it. So I spent most of October getting ready. The first thing I did was journal out the full conversation I wanted to have. Not a script, exactly, but a map. The things I needed to say, the things I was willing to hear, the things I was not willing to compromise on. Dr. Castillo had suggested this months earlier, and I'd been resistant to it. The way I'm resistant to most things that require me to sit still with my own feelings for more than 12 minutes. But I did it, over 3 evenings at my kitchen table, and it was like defusing something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying loaded. What came out of that process was a clearer sense of what I actually wanted. I didn't want my dad to collapse in tears and declare himself a failure. I didn't want an apology that felt coerced. I wanted him to understand, specifically and concretely, what the pattern of his behavior had communicated to me over my lifetime. I wanted him to have to hold that information rather than deflect from it. And I wanted him to ask the question rather than me having to insert myself into his attention like I'd been doing my whole life. That last part was important. I'd spent 29 years contorting myself to fit into my family's line of sight. I was done initiating. If my dad wanted to know why I was gone, he was going to have to ask. The second thing I did was call my mom. This was harder than the journaling. My mom is not my dad. My mom is someone who loves me and who also, through a combination of conflict avoidance and long habit, had participated in a family dynamic that left me invisible. Those two things coexist, and I'd been careful not to conflate them. Calling her felt like opening something delicate. She answered on the second ring and said, "Anthony," in a voice that held about 6 months of worry in 2 syllables. I told her I was okay. I told her I'd been doing a lot of thinking and I was in a good place. And then I told her something I'd never said to her directly. "Mom, I need you to understand that the distance right now isn't me being dramatic. Something has been wrong for a long time, and I'm finally dealing with it. I love you, and I'm not disappearing, but I need Dad to actually reach out to me. Not through you. Not through Garrett. Him." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did we do, Anthony?" The "we" is what I'll remember from that conversation, because it was the first time she acknowledged, without me having to spell it out, that something had been done rather than simply felt. "That's not nothing," I said. "I think you already know some of it. But I need to have the conversation with Dad." She started to cry, quietly. She said, "He's not good at this." "I know," I said, "but I'm not going to make it easier for him by not requiring it." We talked for another half hour. She told me she'd speak to him. I asked her not to coach him or script it for him, just to tell him that if he wanted to understand why I'd been gone, he needed to call me himself. She said she would, and I believed her. The third thing I did was tell Tully all of it. The whole story, from the car my dad co-signed for Garrett to the Rolex to the dessert menu. We were at her apartment, and she listened through all of it without interrupting, which for Tully is an act of extraordinary restraint. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "So you've been waiting for him to notice you your whole life?" "Yeah," I said. "And now you're done waiting?" "Yeah." She nodded slowly. "Good. What do you need from me when it happens?" I want to say something about that question, because I think it's important. What do you need from me when it happens? Not, what do you need from me if it happens? When? She just assumed I was going to do it and asked how she could help. I had never been with someone who made that particular assumption about me before, and I sat with it for a second. "I think I need you to know it happened," I said. "After." "Done," she said, and reached for the remote. The call came 3.5 weeks later. Last month, a Thursday evening in November, my dad's name on my phone. Before I go into what was said, I want to tell you something that I only know because Garrett told me later. Apparently my mom had said to my dad, around the time she and I had our call, "Russell, your son has been gone for a year and you haven't picked up the phone once. Whatever you think is going on, you need to fix it." And my dad, apparently, had said, "He'll come around." And my mom had said, "He's not going to come around. He's already somewhere. You need to go there." I love my mom. I want to be clear about that. She's not a villain. She's a woman who spent 35 years keeping the peace in a house that required a lot of peacekeeping, and she finally decided, for this one thing, to stop keeping it. So my dad called. I let it ring once. Then I answered. "Hey," he said. "Hey, Dad." A pause. He does this thing when he's uncomfortable, where he clears his throat twice before he says anything substantive. 2 throat clears. "Right on schedule. I wanted to call and check in," he said. "We haven't talked much." "No," I said. "We haven't." Another pause. "Your mother says you've got some things on your mind." I took a breath, and I decided right then that I was not going to make this easy. Not cruelly. I wasn't going to hang up on him or throw the worst version of the story at him in the first 30 seconds. But I was going to make him work for it. I was going to require him to ask the real question rather than hovering in the doorway of it forever. "I've got a few things I'd like to talk to you about," I said. "But I think it would help to do it in person. Can you meet me for dinner?" He sounded slightly relieved, which I found almost funny. He probably thought if he could just get me to a table, the energy would dissipate and we'd end up back at baseline. That's the pattern we'd always had. The meal smooths things over. Everyone gets full. Nobody says the hard thing. We go home and call it fine. Not this time. "Sure," he said. "Name the place." And I thought about the steakhouse, the leather menus, the server who refilled your water glass. I thought about the navy blue box and the 5-minute toast and the creme brulee. I named a restaurant. A nice one. And I asked him to meet me at 7 on Saturday. He said, "See you then." I sat on my couch for a minute after I hung up. Then I texted Tully. He called. "Dinner Saturday." She texted back a single thumbs up emoji, which from Tully means, "I have total confidence in you and I will ask 0 follow-up questions until you want to talk," which is my favorite kind of support. Saturday was 4 days away. I was ready. more ready than I'd ever been for anything. I slept fine every night. My dad was already there when I arrived. He was sitting at a table near the window, wearing a collared shirt that he reserves for what he considers formal occasions, which in his taxonomy includes doctor's appointments, funerals, and apparently dinners with the son he'd been estranging for a year without fully realizing he was doing it. He stood up when I came in. We did the brief, back-patting hug that is the Russell specialty, close enough to count, fast enough not to mean anything. We ordered drinks. He asked about work in a general way. I told him it was going well. He said that was good. The water glasses got refilled. It felt, for about 4 minutes, exactly like every other dinner we'd ever had. Then I put my menu down and I said, "Dad, I want to talk about something. I want to talk about why I haven't been around." His hand stilled on his glass. "Okay," he said. I had thought about how to open this for a month. I didn't want to come in with a list. I didn't want it to feel like a deposition. I wanted to give him one clear, specific image and let him sit with it. "I want to go back to Garrett's graduation dinner," I said. "About 18 months ago. Do you remember when Lorraine asked about my graduation?" He looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked at me. "I remember the dinner. When she brought it up, you said you were proud of me too, and then you asked for a coffee refill. And I sat there for another hour, and then I went home." He was quiet. That was the night I realized I was done pretending a thing wasn't true that had been true my whole life. I said, "Which is that you love Garrett and you love me. But you have never seen us the same way. He gets the toast. He gets the box. He gets the 5 minutes where you get a little emotional and everyone claps. And I get the idea of me. The version of me that's nice to acknowledge when someone else brings it up. I wasn't angry when I said it. I want to be clear about that. I had moved through the anger about 10 months earlier in Dr. Castillo's office on a Tuesday afternoon. What I felt sitting across from my dad was something much quieter, a kind of precision, like I was setting something down on the table between us with both hands, carefully, and waiting to see what he did with it. He cleared his throat. Twice. "Anthony," he started. "I'm not finished," I said gently. "I need a couple more minutes." He nodded. The dinner wasn't the first time. It was just the time I finally paid attention to what it meant. The car. The college fund. Every holiday conversation that was about Garrett's life with mine as a footnote. I don't think you were doing it on purpose. I actually believe that. But intention doesn't change what it communicated. What it communicated every single time was that I wasn't worth the same pause, the same acknowledgement, the same effort. The restaurant hummed around us. Someone laughed at a table across the room. My dad looked older sitting there than I'd ever noticed him looking. Not fragile. He's not a fragile man. But genuinely weathered, like a person who has just understood something that cannot be understood gently. He said, "You graduated in the spring." "May," I said. "I should have done something." "Yeah, Dad. You should have." He exhaled, long and slow, like he was letting something out that he'd been holding without knowing it. "I don't know why I didn't," he said. "I don't have a good answer for that." I almost said, "That's okay," because that is the reflexive response I have been training out of myself for a year and a half. Instead, I said, "I know you don't, but I needed you to know that I noticed. And here's the part one need to tell you, because it's the part that surprised me." My dad reached across the table. This man who expresses emotion through golf scores and the occasional back pat. And he put his hand over mine, briefly, the way you'd see a much more demonstrably affectionate father do it in a movie, and he said, "I'm sorry, Anthony. I hear you. It wasn't a collapse. It wasn't a dramatic reckoning. It wasn't the version of this scene you might construct in your head, where the father tears up and recounts every moment he failed you and pledges to be different forever. This is real life, and real life is quieter than that." But he said it, and he said it looking at me, and he didn't deflect or minimize or reach for a dessert menu. We sat there for a moment. Then I said, "I want a relationship with you, Dad. I'm not gone. I just needed you to actually come find me instead of waiting for me to walk back in." He said, "I should have come sooner." "Yeah," I said, "but you came. We had dinner." It was genuinely pleasant in the way things can be pleasant when the hardest part has already been said. He asked real questions about my job, and I answered them honestly and in full instead of giving him the condensed, "I don't want to take up too much space" version. He told me about my mom's garden project and a trip they were planning for spring. Normal things. Family things. They felt different carried by a conversation that had cleared the air first. When the check came, he picked it up without asking. In the parking lot, he hugged me again, different this time. Longer. He patted my back, but didn't let go as fast. "We'll do better," he said. "I know," I said. And I meant it, cautiously, the way you mean it when you believe something is possible without being certain it's guaranteed. I drove home and called Tully. She answered on the first ring. "He said sorry," I said. "He meant it, I think." "Good," she said. "Are you okay?" I sat in my car a moment, actually checking rather than just answering on autopilot. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am." So here's where things stand. I went home for Thanksgiving, first time in over a year. My mom's cooking, my dad's football commentary, Garrett making a dry joke about the yams that was funnier than he intended. At one point my dad came up beside me in the kitchen when we were both reaching for the same serving spoon, and he just looked at me and nodded, the way people acknowledge something without saying it again. I nodded back. We served ourselves and went to the table. It's not fixed. You don't undo 30 years of a pattern with one honest dinner. But something shifted. The pretending stopped. And pretending, I've decided, is the part that was actually costing me the most. Tully came to Thanksgiving. My mom pulled her into the kitchen to see the garden plans, and they stayed in there for 40 minutes. And when they came out, they had the particular energy of two women who have decided they like each other, which made the whole afternoon simultaneously easier and more terrifying. The promotion came through in October. Senior advisor, my own office, a number on my paycheck that my 23-year-old self would have assumed was a typo. Claudette shook my hand and said, "Don't get comfortable," which from her means there's more to come. I didn't buy myself a Rolex. I thought about it. There was definitely a version of this story that ended that way and felt symbolic about it. But what I actually bought was a round of drinks for Ozzy and two friends on a Friday night. And I sat at that bar with people who had seen me clearly from the start, and it felt better than any piece of metal on my wrist. I know what I'm worth now. It took me a while, but I know it. And for anyone sitting at a table waiting for someone to notice you, waiting for the toast that doesn't come, the box that never appears, I'm telling you what I wish someone had told me at 23. The waiting is what costs you. The moving is what saves you. And sometimes, if you're lucky, after you've done the moving and built the life, someone finally asks why you left. And you get to tell them. That's my story. Thanks for listening.